Okay, good morning, everybody. There are still folks that are signing in. However, we're going to get started here, make sure that we stay on time and on task. Welcome back to day 2 of our IT Information Security Summer Festival webinar series sponsored by iSecure. We are, again, based out of Western New York, and Western New York is experiencing its good old Western New York weather. If you're here, you know that that means rain and clouds and miserable weather, but we're going to tarry through over here anyway. Today's presentation is coming to us from the good folks of Rapid7. Alex Page is going to be the one taking us through this discussion, and as you can see from the title page there, Compromised Accounts, Security Blind Spots is the discussion that he will be leading us through. We at iSecure have been with Rapid7 for a couple of years now, and they have been very instrumental in us in our professional services engagements that we do for our customer base. We do use their tools as a third-party scanner for folks that are in our client base. So we have grown to know the tool very well and the people that work there, and are really feel lucky that we are able to have them present this week. Alex, again, comes to us very well versed in the subject, and we look forward to the education that he'll provide us today. So without further ado, Alex, the floor is yours. Thank you again, and we look forward to hearing you give your talk.
Absolutely, thank you. And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to get on the phone virtually with everybody here and talk through this today. As was alluded to, iSecure are great partners of ours. And one thing I especially like is the Western New York roots. What I'll tell you before I introduce myself is I was raised in Canandaigua, New York. I taught tennis lessons as a summer job in Pittsford. So anybody who's doing as good a work as iSecure does in Western New York and taking care of folks is a friend of mine. But I now live in Boston. I'm a senior product specialist here at Rapid7. I've been in the security industry for almost 10 years, and I've been with Rapid7 for the past 7 months. My job as a senior product specialist is kind of to sit somewhere in between sales and product management, and what that means is I'm very involved in customer-facing conversations. And I've had the benefit of talking to literally hundreds of security programs over the 7 short months I've been with Rapid7, hundreds of security programs about a fairly specific aspect of security. And that is to say, I have my finger pretty well on the pulse of where the industry is at within that area. And I'll, as we go through, get pretty specific on what area of security that is. But this morning I wanted to share that with you, share those observations, share what we're seeing both here at Rapid7, me individually, and what the industry is saying, and help to kind of paint a picture for you all. Some of you hopefully will certainly be learning some new things, but a lot of you will also maybe be validating assumptions that you've made. And it's just good to hear that other people are fighting the same fight or seeing something similar. With a positive result being, number one, that you feel like you're better positioned to make decisions about prioritization and how you invest your time moving forward after today. And then secondarily, also to give you a good lens to look of where Rapid7 fits into this discussion. So without further ado, I'll start to get into it. What I'm going to share with you are some of those observations. I know I've heard a couple beeps as I've been talking. What I was saying is my job gives the benefit of talking to hundreds of security programs about security in general and where they're at. So I'll share those with you to get us grounded a bit. The first one is we hear this all the time. It's not if you'll have a security incident, but when. Or maybe more aggressively, it's not if you'll be breached, but when. You hear this quite a bit from analysts, from vendors, from security pundits in general. And it almost feels like at this point we're being beat about the head and neck with it. But what it actually means, what this actually means to us is that we can't continue to be so reliant on prevention. A determined attacker is going to get around preventative controls. So preventative controls are good hygiene. Don't mistake that. good hygiene. But as an industry, we cannot continue to be so reliant on them because determined attackers get around them. That is inevitable. And so this inevitability, this statement, it's not if but when, really speaks to that. Anti-malware, firewalls, IDS, IPS, next-gen firewalls, next-gen anti-malware, again, very good hygiene, but those aren't going to stop a determined attacker. And so what you're seeing, and Dan Geer, if you're not familiar with him, says it more eloquently than I ever could. If you haven't picked up Dan's stuff, he's worth a read. He's very smart, so it's dense, but I would suggest it. He says there comes a point where further investment in intrusion avoidance is diseconomic. Same way of saying it, just a different way of saying the same thing. So what's happening? What does this all mean? What it means is that we as an industry are starting to move a bit away from it, and this will continue down that path, away from such heavy reliance on prevention. Gartner says that detection and response capabilities today represent less than 10% of the average security budget. But over the next 6 years, that's going to grow to 60%, 60%. So kind of let that wash over you for a second. We're at an inflection point as an industry where something that we're doing as a minority is less than 10% of our focus today is going to become the majority of what we focus our time and resources on. And what that means is that there's a lot of people trying to figure out what that means. And what I'll tell you as a segue to the second observation is that people feel hamstrung. They know that determined attackers get around these preventative controls. They know that they need to focus more or focus at all on detection and response. They need to either get into this space or start to invest more into it, but they're hamstrung because traditional tools are very heavy on the human element. And as we all know in the industry, extra bodies, warm bodies, people to throw at problems is not a luxury we have. And for argument's sake, let's say that the business gets it, your business gets it, your organization gets it. We're going to invest in security. Probably a lot of the people on the phone have felt this to say, hey, we want to get more people to throw at the laundry list of problems that we have in security. Well, talent's hard to find. It's not a Western New York thing. It's not even a New York thing or a tri-state thing. It's not a Northeast thing. It's a global thing. We have a lack of security talent for hire. So what I'm saying here is that no matter how much headcount you have today, whether that number is growing or not, any model that is reliant on the human element is a broken one. And that's the message that we're getting from the market is I have talented people, but I have a limited number of talented people, and I don't want to apply their efforts in the wrong way. So when we talk about detection and response, do not apply my talented people's time towards manufacturing intelligence from data. Traditional log management tools, traditional SIM tools, powerful, yes. Heavy on the human element, yes. And so when it comes to moving faster, if this is a generic loop of incident response, when it comes to where the rubber meets the road in risk mitigation, detecting, investigating, and containing these inevitable incidents, speed counts. So in order to be effective at the detection and faster at the investigation phase, companies are demanding that automation is built in. The existing model is clearly broken. It's either a barrier to entry for them to get into detection and response on the tool side, or it's a barrier to them rolling up a nice clean metric around time to contain. This is a very popular, sexy metric for CISOs or people who are rolling up security metrics to the board. For most programs, it's aspirational. Most programs are not doing this, but the idea of saying, hey, look, I got bad news for you. These things are inevitable, but the good news is you can start to measure one aspect of my program's success as how quickly can we contain these inevitabilities. Yes, they're inevitable, but success now looks at how quickly we can contain. So that's why the urgency and the importance for the ability to not only detect well, but also quickly investigate is so critical, because this is going to be a key measure of success for us moving forward. So the third and final observation might be the most critical. So to recap, industry's going this way, less reliance on prevention. So where are we going? We're going more towards detection and response. That's a challenge because it requires extra people, which we don't have, so we need automation. So now we're into it. Now we're going down this path. We're into detection. What has become crystal clear about detection is that we as an industry are pretty good at assets. Detecting compromised assets is a strength for us, relatively speaking, because we've been focused on assets for decades. Over 30 years as an industry, we've been focused on compromised assets. If my laptop were to be compromised in some way, shape, or form, there's a pretty good chance we'll detect that. If you contrast that, though, with accounts, compromised accounts or stolen credentials, that is a blind spot. It's either a completely blind spot for our industry, or depending on the maturity of the program I'm speaking with, it's just relatively blind. There's a much lower degree of confidence around the organization's ability to detect an attacker who has stolen credentials, whether that's through a phishing campaign or otherwise, and is using those stolen credentials to get in and move laterally around the environment and persist. So this impersonation, this type of attack, it's a blind spot. So here's the so what, and we always have to ask ourselves, so what in security? Because there's a laundry list of things that are gaps. There's a laundry list of things that are hard, that are difficult, that we're not good at, and we need to prioritize our efforts. The so what, why do I care about compromised accounts or stolen credentials when I already have this existing list of things that I need to address? Well, the data is starting to quantitatively show us, and qualitatively we're hearing stories as well, that this has become the attacker's favorite tool in their tool belt. I took this slice from the latest, the 2014 Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. It's figure number 9 that talks about threat actions, and it's actually a 5-year spread. It goes 2013, 12, 11, 10, 9. But that would have been an eye chart. You can grab the report and look at it, and you'll see the data was trending this direction. The way to look at this is to say, this doesn't mean that an attacker in their campaign against your organization won't use malware. They won't establish C2, which is command and control communication. It doesn't mean that. What it means is the most likely thing that they're going to do is use stolen credentials. So if we think about risk mitigation and risk reduction, if I were to oversimplify risk for the purpose of this conversation, risk is basically likelihood and impact. And if this is the most likely thing an attacker is going to do, then it becomes logical that the biggest impact you can have in your ability to mitigate risk or reduce risk associated with attacks is to have robust detection capabilities around the use of stolen credentials. So that's the quantitative side. I like Verizon because I'm a numbers guy. If you're not familiar with the report, it's the most reputable in the industry because it has the biggest sample size. They do a great job, and that helps, but they studied 1,300 breaches last year, for example. Huge sample size, very well done. If you haven't picked it up, I recommend you do it. On the qualitative side, we hear about things like eBay. Now, we may never know the full extent, but what we seem to know so far as public information that they've given us is that their breach started with just 3 employees whose accounts were compromised, whose credentials were stolen. What happened between then and millions of customers' data being released? Probably a lot of things. But again, it helps to underscore what we're seeing in the market. And I can tell you, again, having talked to hundreds of security programs, there is a sense of urgency around this. There's already a movement towards detection and response, but the ability to illuminate this blind spot has become a sense of urgency in the market, a prioritized effort. So if we're to talk a little bit about that, let's talk about how people attack using credentials. If this is a generic model, First, they have to get them. They have to harvest the credentials. A very popular, well-known method would be phishing. There's also other mechanisms to get these credentials. There is a defined black market for stolen credentials that are being bought and sold. But no matter how they get them, once they use them to get into the network, one of the first things they're going to do is scan you to see what's alive. Is it segmented? Where can I go from here? And then they're going to start to move, because the last thing they want to do is stay where they are. That just improves the likelihood that they get caught. So they want to move laterally. We hear about lateral movement a lot. There's a lot of mechanisms to move laterally, but at this point they're attacking the soft underbelly of the network, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But sometimes people will say, well, hey, Alex, what about malware? Couldn't they phish and use malware? Well, yes, again, the same mechanism is ultimately just that, a mechanism to get in and then move laterally. And the best way to move laterally, and a lot of the pieces of malware are designed to do this, is to grab credentials or cached passwords and do things like a pass-the-hash attack or whatever it might be. But again, just understand that the last thing that they want to do is stay where they are. They want to move laterally for two reasons. Number one, they can get to more privileged level of access. So if they were to steal my credentials here at Rapid7, I'm very boring. I don't even have local admin privileges. So they would want to move, either if they couldn't escalate my privilege, they want to move laterally and find someone who has a privileged account. The second reason is we hear a lot about APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. If we really hone in on the P, the persistence, the best way for them to persist in your environment is to spread their presence. So let's say you stumble upon the fact that I don't think Alex, something's up with Alex's account. If you were able to actually detect that in some way, shape, or form, and you were to shut me down in Active Directory or whatever you did to remediate that issue, if someone's moved laterally, they've already compromised dozens, if not hundreds, of more accounts. And so they remain and they persist. But ultimately, once they've done that, they're trying to get to privileged level of access so they can find your critical assets and exfiltrate your sensitive data. If you're familiar with the kill chain theory from Lockheed Martin, I'll speak to that, and if you're not, I'll simplify it. The kill chain theory basically says that one of the few advantages we have as defenders over attackers, which is an otherwise very unfair fight in the attacker's favor, but one of the few advantages we do have is if they don't get to data exfiltration, if you can stop them before they exfiltrate data, you've actually won. They're not successful until they exfiltrate the data. So the kill chain theory is about doing reconnaissance on how they do what they do, so you know what it looks like, so you can build out detection mechanisms to surface them and get them out before they actually exfiltrate. So if you apply that to this conversation, you start to understand why Rapid7 has gotten involved in helping customers address this urgent challenge. We're experts. We've done the reconnaissance because we're experts at stealing credentials. We've been stealing credentials for years. We've been using them to get into networks and moving laterally and exfiltrating for years. We've been doing it with our Metasploit team as ethical hackers. We've been doing it for our customers through penetration tests to surface gaps so that they can highlight those and address those and prioritize those, but we know what that looks like. Between HD Moore and the Metasploit team, the Metasploit community, and our customer base, which brings together very skilled attackers, Rapid7 has systematic access to some of the most skilled attackers in the world. So what we've done over the past few years is we've realized that we've known this is an issue, compromised accounts, stolen credentials. It's the easiest way to attack what's sometimes referred to as the soft underbelly of the network, to move laterally, undeterred, undetected, and hide in the noise. There's so much noise in the network. We know what that looks like, and we realize we're in a good position to help. So we've systematically used those folks over the past 3 years to develop user insight to help to surface these behaviors. we know what this looks like, we have a deep understanding, and if we analyze and do the analytics on your data, we know what to look for, and we surface those behaviors before they get to data exfiltration. So how does this all come together, and how can you conceptualize what we're doing here? Well, for a long time, and I know we have some customers on the phone who might use us for our leading vulnerability management technology, or maybe they use Metasploit as a tool to do their own pen tests. But for a long time, we've been collecting information on assets and controls about your environment. But now we're starting to collect a lot of information about your users and their behaviors. And we're basically, the way to think about what we're doing here to help solve this problem is we're building this massive graph of all the relationships between these things and who forged them. The relationships between your users and your assets and who forged them, et cetera. And when an attacker gets a hold of credentials and starts to get in and move laterally, it looks like a ripple right through your graph. That's not how we show you the data. We give you the who, what, when, where, how, but that's the way to think of what I mean by this next piece, which is putting it through the lens of the attacker method. We know what it looks like. We know how to put together the information and see the ripples so that once we put all your data through our analytics engine and contextualize it, because we know the attacker mindset so well, and because we have the business context about your environment, which assets are more critical, which users are more valuable or risky or are leaving the company soon, et cetera. And when you put your data through an analytics engine that has that context, it makes threat and risk management that much easier. And it helps to round out your visibility and your ability to actually get into detection and response and do it well and do it quickly. So we'll always say, don't like to take my word for it, or don't take my word for it. From a customer perspective, this customer right here actually reduced their average investigation time on a given investigation by 5x. And so if you apply that to any measurements you are or are not doing, again, speed counts and there's value there. So it's about half past or not even. We got through that much more quickly than I'd expected. I don't know, iSecure, if we want to make this more of an open forum or if you'd prefer to take the questions offline, but I have the time reserved. I'll leave that up to you.
Sure, great. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate that. Kind of the format that we followed is that we have had folks enter in the chat window on the WebEx piece to ask the questions, whether they can go to you privately or to iSecure privately, and we could ask the questions from there. Other than that, this was a really, really good presentation. We appreciate those key observations that you made were really, really good. So that was excellent. While we're waiting for the questions to potentially compile here, there were a couple of quick housekeeping notes I did want to make mention of. I know I slammed Western New York in the beginning of the conference, but it is a great place, and one of the things that we are doing to make Western New York better is we are having a security summit in Buffalo on August 19th. And Rapid 7 will be there with Nick Percoco, and Nick is a world-renowned speaker for security, and he'll be our lead speaker there. And it will be a great day of kind of something like we're doing now, only in live and in person. So that is something that's coming up. Also wanted to make reference that we do know as a security company, we want to protect the security of everybody that is on this call. And as I'm sure you do notice that there are names in the participant box, we are fighting with WebEx and Cisco to figure out how to get that out of there. We do apologize. But for your own safety, it seems like you've already are doing this, but just to make mention of it, just make sure that you have just one name or a tagline name or something like that, just to make sure that your identity is being respected there. Again, our apologies for that. Lastly, as I made mention yesterday, we are on Twitter and on LinkedIn and on Instagram with our hashtag for the week, iSecureSWS. If you are an Instagram user, if you want to use hashtag iSecure SWS, you'll get a picture of our little war room that we have set up here to make sure that these conferences go without a hitch. And again, you can follow us on Twitter as well with that hashtag and make some notes with that as well. And I think that's it for the housekeeping issues. I do have a question here, Alex, that I wanted to pass along your way, and it's, what are your thoughts on cyber battalions and how can they help in the private industry of IT security?
Sorry, I was coming off mute. So the question was, what are my thoughts on cyber battalions?
Yes, cyber battalions, and how can they help out in the private industry of IT security?
Yeah, so what I'd ask is that whoever submitted the question maybe give an additional context about cyber battalions. I'll answer it the way I think it was intended, or my interpretation of the question. Again, if there's more detail to make sure I get centered, or if I just miss the mark altogether, please let me know. But I actually think it's a perfect segue to what was just touched upon with the Security Summit in Buffalo and Rapid7's Nick Percoco, because what Nick, you may or may not realize, has done is he helped to found a movement called We Are the Cavalry. I believe the website is actually iamthecavalry.org. And what it all stands for is my understanding of this question, which is the bringing together of security minds to help to fight things like, you hear a lot about the Internet of Things, or things that are coming, things that are challenges industry-wide that if we pull together and we don't wait for legislation to do us for us, because legislation moves slowly, we can make real impact. And so offshoots of that we see a ton of, which is threat intel sharing, much more tactical. Hey, I'm seeing this right now, bad egress from my environment. There's these bad IP addresses, these bad domains, and those help in the moment, you know, in terms of risk mitigation in that moment, very helpful. And we see a lot of that industry-wide with certain verticals. We see a lot of that in the commercial space with threat intel for hire that you can contract with. But the overall idea of banding together in many different ways to help everyone see more and cut through the noise and make a difference is, I think it can have a real impact. And if you follow We Are the Cavalry, you'll start to see that they're doing just that. And how it relates to this conversation as well is any threat intel that anyone on the phone might already be collecting through like an ISAC or a commercial one that they subscribe to or otherwise, you can pipe that directly into user insight and overlay it over the top of your data to see if you're hitting any of that, those bad destinations. So
great.
Hopefully
yeah,
that
great.
answered.
Yeah, great answer. There's actually a little bit more deeper detail that we want to go to. The follow-up to making sure that we hit on the mark was the cyber battalions that were created for the military to help against government hacking internationally, and how the military is playing a role in that.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Rather than voice my opinion that's going to be not as educated as the person who asked, I probably won't voice one. I obviously think there's a lot of discussions going on in that arena that I've only skimmed the surface of. So I think there's a delicate line between, what I'll say is I think there's a delicate line between national security and privacy, and it seems like we're walking that as an industry and trying to figure that out.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so we actually have another question that's here. It's a follow-up for the conversation that you just led us through. It says here, other than simultaneous logins, what types of other suspicious user behavior are you seeing that's being detected? Yeah,
it's a really good question, because I think when I talk to companies, if they have started to dip their toe in the water with compromised accounts, it's likely that. It's something like, you know, simultaneous connections. So that's a good foray into the discussion. To round that out, and we have dozens of detection rules that'll fire, that'll look for specific things. Some examples would be like your classic pass the hash, whereas I got onto Alex Page's laptop, I've scraped the cache, so Windows caches credentials, and they can be extracted. They're still in hash form, but they can be used to send off other machines and start to move laterally. And if one successfully authenticates, you're now on that box and rinse and repeat. And it's a very popular method for people to move laterally. So we will detect that. We'll detect a few different types of local of lateral movement, because what we're seeing in an agentless capacity is we're able to pull specific information off your endpoints, again, without an agent. But that type of visibility attackers rely on, because most environments they know are not looking at the local accounts. They know are not analyzing that data because it's not manageable. And because we've automated it, we're about to do about, I think there's 4 or 5 different types of lateral movement detection. Other examples besides that, and besides multi-country authentication is what we call it, would be event log deletion, so an attacker covering their tracks. Another would be, hey, Alex Page just hit a critical asset, which is not unusual. He touches that critical asset pretty regularly. However, we've never seen him do it from this host. So Alex Page is hitting a critical asset from a new host. Could be indicative of an attacker trying to impersonate me who's gotten my credentials. There's some pretty simplistic ones like privilege escalation, use of a disabled account, enabling of an account, brute force attacks, all that stuff. But where we really start to move the needle that people aren't doing today are our ability to surface what's otherwise lost in the noise around lateral movement, people covering their tracks, and the context that's needed to say this looks a lot like Alex, but because of this piece of information, I don't think it is. And the last thing, I'm realizing this is becoming rambling and long-winded, but I think it's important to note, we also have a managed honeypot. We clearly didn't invent the idea of a honeypot. We just know that they're tough to manage, so we have a managed honeypot that you deploy within User Insight that's going to help to surface these attackers pretty quickly.
Great, excellent. We do have another question here, and we were hoping that you can share the top 5 or so types of suspicious activity User Insight is finding.
Yeah, that's a really good one. So, top 5. Most of them do center around this idea of stolen credentials. But, so I'll tell you the way I'm answering, because I don't have the data in front of me of what we're detecting most often. But top 5 most impactful would be, number 1, account impersonation, whether that's a one-time thing or something where, hey, pretty consistently we see this admin account seems to be shared by 4 people, for example. Also, the lateral movement one is key, again, because it's just things that people don't see today, and we always talk in security about you can't manage or mitigate the risk you don't know about. So a big part of User Insight is showing people things that are true about their environment that they didn't realize. And lateral movement's a big one, account impersonation is another. Cloud usage will tell you every single cloud service that's being used in your environment. That's not necessarily an incident response type thing. That's more like, look, this is happening in your environment. It could be increasing your attack surface area, et cetera. And then the final one, and I alluded to it earlier, would be egress to a known threat. So we have a threat feed section that you can subscribe to as many or as few threat feeds as you want. You can pipe in your own threat intel that you might get from an industry ISAC or from a commercial vendor, but your ability to pick through various threat intel sources, threat feeds, and look for bad egress. So if you have a user or users hitting a known bad destination, we'll light that up right away. Oh, and then finally, this will be my 5th. I lost count, so I'll just call it my 5th. Phishing. So we can hook into your Exchange server, and we'll extract every URL and bounce it against, I think, 4 different crowdsourced phishing services. This is what they do for a business. And so any of the phishing campaigns that they're aware of that your users have been sent and or clicked on, we'll be able to tell you that they received it and or clicked on it, and it'll give you a really good idea of the scope of the phishing attack.
Great, great. It seems like you've also piqued some interest here in regards to when you talked about a managed honeypot. Can you go a little bit into more detail of what that would look like? Seems like there's some interest in that.
Yeah. So what I'll tell you right now is I don't want to mislead anyone. I am not an engineer. I've been in the industry for a long time, so I can talk about this stuff, but I reach a technical depth pretty quickly sometimes. So the honeypot would be one of those. All I know is to oversimplify it. It's an OVA. It's like a managed virtualized instance that we make look very normal and disguised from the attackers. The idea being that certainly if they scan you, one of the first things, like I talked about, that attackers are going to do once they get in is scan the environment. And we give you the ability to whitelist your scanners, because most companies will have their own scanners. That'll trigger the honeypot, but you can just say, nope, that's okay. Anytime this scans us, I'm okay with it. And once you've built a nice little fence or whitelist around your scanners, for example, the honeypot will light up and you'll at least know you're being scanned, which could be an early indicator of an issue. So that's the oversimplification of the honeypot. Basically, we've taken what is a known good thing and we just manage it for you. And if anybody's interested, we can also get more technical depth. What I'll tell you also is we also have honey users. So you put a fake user in your LDAP. We make ours pretty attractive. We make them an admin account, but nobody knows the password. It's a max length password that nobody knows. So the user doesn't exist. They're not real. You shouldn't see any activity associated with them, attempted or certainly successful authentications with that account.
Great, thanks, Alex. And I believe that is the end of the questions here. And again, thank you so much for taking us through this discussion as we were sitting around here in the conference room and discussing the presentation that was going on. It's just great to see that there are just certain trends that are just transcending any manufacturer or any vertical of things that are out there. Just certain core competencies and core issues that face everybody that's out there right now, and it seems like you're reinforcing that and we're able to touch on that as well. So we really appreciate the discussion that you were able to bring us through.
Yeah, and I appreciate the platform. Like I said, if I were to have one takeaway, it'd be that whether you do it with Rapid7 or do it with another mechanism, you have to start looking at this. You have to, and so that would be the takeaway. And if you want to talk to us about us and include us in that conversation, just let the folks at iSecure know. They'll know who to get in touch with and the right resources based on what you're looking for.
Great, perfect. Thank you so much. And I believe that this will conclude our webinar. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining and being able to talk about what we had to talk about today. And please remember also that our 2 p.m. webinar is postponed, and so our next one will be tomorrow morning. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.